Hello, 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 and welcome to A Chicken Can't Lay a Duck Egg with Graeme Maxton and Bernice Maxton-Lee, two authors and policy insiders beaming in from Taiwan. Graeme is the author of 7 acclaimed books on climate change and economics and the automotive industry, which we can't do this time, but I would love to look at that in some more detail sometime. He was previously Secretary General of the Club of Rome, which is a not-for-profit designed to address the multiple crises facing humanity and the planet. We also have Bernice Maxton-Lee, who's a former director of the Jane Goodall Institute, and she lectures on climate change and deforestation. We've just done a session on trees, which was very good, at the Technical University in Vienna, and is a research associate at the ETH University in Zurich. And they have written this incredible book, A Chicken Can't Lay a Duck Egg, How COVID-19 Can Solve the Climate Crisis. Well, perfect title for 2020. Now, you're beaming in from Taiwan. How's Taiwan's experience of COVID been? Can we learn from Taiwan?
It's been great.
Yes. I mean, we're living in a parallel universe here. We had a few cases of the virus at the beginning of the year. The government then managed to stamp it out. And we've gone, 8 months without any cases at all. And so life here is actually... It's pretty much normal. I mean, we're going to a concert in the concert hall at the weekend, and we go out for dinner, and we look at what's happening in Europe, and we think, my goodness, this is we can't have any empathy with the people that are there. We know everybody's going through so much difficulty, and we're in a strange place here.
Well, just briefly, why don't you think our leaders have been looking to places like Taiwan for how to handle the crisis?
That gave us so much frustration, particularly in the early days, as things really started kicking off in Italy and then in Austria and then across the rest of Europe and in Britain. And we asked ourselves the same questions when Taiwan and at that point also Korea and of course China had set very different examples of how to deal with the crisis. We couldn't understand why. Those questions weren't being asked. Graeme?
No, I mean, the Taiwanese, they had experience with SARS in 2003. The vice president was an epidemiologist. He's now not in the same job. And so they knew what to do. They knew to clamp down very quickly. And of course, you've got a society where people think more about the community. They think more about the good of others. It's less individualistic. They're quite prepared to sacrifice some personal freedom for the good of everybody. And so they've got a combination which has been able to succeed, where in Europe and the US and so much of the rest of the world, this push for freedom and individualism has created so many problems.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I wish we had. Right, I want to talk to you about this book. So, and I wanted to ask you about the title. It's a really unusual title, and worked with a lot of books over the course of a year. Where does it come from? A chicken can't lay a duck egg, and what does it mean?
So this was a piece of inspiration which Bernice found actually, which is in the 1960s, Malcolm X, who was a human and civil rights activist and black rights activist, talked about how a chicken can't lay a duck egg. And what he meant is that a system which is designed to do one thing can't do something else. A chicken can only lay a chicken's egg, it can't lay a duck egg because it's not designed to do that. And in the same way, our social systems and our economic systems are designed and focused on maximizing short-term profit. And if we want to solve our environmental problems or our ecological problems, then climate change, we need a different system. It's not enough to try and change the system, because the system is not designed to fix environmental problems. The system is designed to maximize short-term profit for a small group of people. And so if we're going to solve climate change, then we need to change the system.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And I think we're going to try and take a look at that idea. It's one of the central ideas, obviously, of your book in a bit more detail. Now, you say in your subtitle how COVID-19 can solve the climate crisis. Why is this such a big chance to make a response to the climate emergency?
Well, for years we've been saying that some fairly major things need to happen in order to turn the tanker, which is the global economic system. And the things that we've been saying need to happen to stop carbon emissions and to prevent runaway climate change, many people have said, well, that's impossible. It's just not possible to cut the airline industry, for example. It's not possible to shut down production of consumer goods at the scale that's necessary. And so while people might have said that our ideas were good in theory, in practice it was thought to be impossible. And then COVID came along, and lo and behold, for a completely different reason, those things started to happen. So we saw actually an opportunity with COVID-19, because the things that have already started in order to control the pandemic are exactly the sorts of things which need to be continued in order to prevent runaway climate change.
Exactly. I mean, we've seen emissions falling in 2020 by 6 or 7%, and that's what they need to fall every year now. We've seen people not using their cars so much. We've seen governments step in and help people, some countries better than others, but pay people financially to stay at home. Those are all the kinds of initiatives that we need if we're going to slow the pace of climate change. So it started us on the right path and started people thinking more radically about what the system means and what it achieves. And so we think we have a unique opportunity actually to try and make some of these changes permanent and to move humanity in a better direction.
That's really interesting. It really brings to life that phrase, in every crisis is an opportunity. And it's really interesting, Graeme, you said that, we believe it's possible. And I think that's a really interesting idea, that this is the first time that perhaps we've got the opportunity to step away from being overwhelmed by what we have to do and actually say, oh, well, it's possible. Look, this has happened. But you do spend a lot of time in your book talking about that a big part of the climate problem lies in what we think, which I found was really interesting. So, what are these beliefs, what are this modern belief system are you referring to that is a big part of the problem?
So we've got a situation where people are now beginning to question the system, and they're beginning to look at what we were doing and what all that crazy pace of life was about. But they haven't yet got to the point of understanding that what we were doing before was actually a manufactured set of ideas. It was almost like a religion, that we believed that
like a religion.
Like a religion, exactly. So we believed that economic growth was necessary. We believed that economic growth creates jobs. We believed that individual freedom is more important than collective responsibility. And so many of these ideas were deliberately pushed into society from the late 1940s onwards, actually mostly in the 1970s. But they've convinced us that we have to keep investing, we have to keep boosting profits, we have to keep boosting economic growth. And actually, none of this is true. I mean, for centuries, people lived without much economic growth relatively okay. And it's possible to live in a much more balanced way with nature and much more balanced societies. We just need to think about it differently. It's not a fundamental problem with humanity. It's the way we approach the world. It's a mental problem that we need to overcome if we're to move on to something which is more genuinely sustainable.
I think if I can jump in, one of the things that really gets in the way of sufficient measures to bring down carbon emissions is this idea that every solution has to make a profit, has to be profitable. That's something that is a belief. It's not a fact, but it's something that we really have to get away from.
That's really interesting. So it's almost like it's a mindset problem, not a technological problem. Can we go into a little bit more detail on that, because I think it's really fascinating. Could you perhaps explain a little bit about how the Austrian school influenced Thatcher and Reagan? It's a brilliant example of showing how beliefs can be so powerful.
So without going into too much economic history, there's a group called the Mont Pelerin Society, which was formed in the late 1940s in Switzerland in the town of Mont Pelerin. And some of the 20th century's most famous economists were part of that. And they believed that individual freedom was important, that the role of government should be minimized, and that businesses should be liberated. They shouldn't be regulated. so that that would create economic growth. And those beliefs, they've pushed through academia, they've pushed through articles, they've pushed through links to politicians. Most of Ronald Reagan's economic advisors were members of the society. Margaret Thatcher's chief economist was a member of the society. And through journalism and through changing the way economics is taught in universities and schools, they've pushed this idea that minimal regulation is good. Why should we regulate economics less than we regulate any other aspect of our lives? That individual freedom is sacrosanct, which is denying what I think is a natural desire for people to actually work together in many cases. And so they've created this mindset, this religion, as I said before, where we all believe that we have to have growth. We all believe that that's the only way we can move ahead. It's a neoliberal mindset. And it's simply not true. I mean, people have lived in completely different ways, focused on well-being and welfare in the past, and they can do that again in the future. We've been brainwashed by this small group of thinkers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think it's really important to remember that, because, we do a huge amount with psychologists and psychiatrists, neuroscientists, and we are really biased towards our own way of thinking. And, whichever way you believe the world to be, it's very hard to think that that's not part of who you are and your identity. So to frame it as this is a mindset you've just been given and you believe it because a small group of really powerful economists really influenced some leaders whose ideas are still coming through is a really interesting reframing device of the way we live. So thank you for that. I know economics is your thing, so thank you for explaining it so beautifully. So I guess my next question is to get to the heart of the serious nature of the climate emergency. So, it's in the climate emergency, it's incredibly serious. So why do so few of us really understand what is needed to change it?
Well,
Bernice?
I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and there's a lot of misinformation that's been put out. And that is partly, very largely deliberate. The climate situation is, of course, extremely complicated. It's a very complicated area of science, and it takes a long time. It's taken a long time for us to even begin to understand it. But there is, again, a relatively small group of people that has put out a counter story, a counter narrative to confuse the understanding of the climate situation.
I mean, I think it's also that the problem is not lack of data. I mean, we know and we have known for more than 20 years the scale of the problem and what will happen, but it's happening very slowly. So that it's difficult for people to understand. I mean, we're talking about something happening over decades and having consequences over centuries. And it seems also very difficult for people to understand something which they can't influence. I mean, you and me as an individual will have no effect, no matter how sustainably we try to live. We can't stop climate change. But we've been told by these neoliberal economists that we can, and we've been told that the way we shop and what we recycle will have an impact, which has also diluted the message to a great extent. In fact, we're changing the chemistry of the planet in a fundamental way. The planet is today hotter than it's been in the last 3 million years. I mean, it's a phenomenal change. I mean, we talk about 1% or 1.1% degrees centigrade rather as a change, and you think that's tiny. I mean, you experience more than that every day. But actually, it's a bit more like the human body. I mean, if the human body increases by 1 degree centigrade, then actually that's classified as a fever. And if it goes to 2 degrees, then your life's in danger. And it's something like that with the planet. We've gone to 1% or 1 degree already. If we go to 2 degrees, then the thing gets out of control. And so we've got this planetary phenomenon taking place, and we're being told that if you shop more ecologically or you take the train instead of a plane, that you can influence that. But actually, the scale of the problem and the momentum of the problem, which has been building for more than 20 years, is almost too large for people to get their head around. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help people understand that all these ideas that we can build windmills or that we can buy Teslas, none of that's going to work. We need to be much more fundamental and much more radical in the way we think about tackling this problem.
Wow, can we stay with that again for a little bit longer? You know, because it's such a big idea. So, you know, I think you said, Graeme, that it really doesn't matter what the individual does.
Yeah, I mean, so that's a tough message.
No, it's interesting. It's interesting. But are we using recycling and buying more ethically, buying a Tesla or, you know, whatever? Are we using that as a way to kind of feel that we are in control of it, or, you know, what are we being sold that as a way to distract us from what actually needs to be done?
Of course, because the system doesn't want you to do anything other than keep on shopping. And so what they've tried to do is persuade you to shop in a different way, but just keep spending, keep the money going into the economy, because that's what the economy needs to pay off all the debts and to make a few people rich.
I think it's important to point out that it's not like there's a sort of major conspiracy. You know, the leaders are the ones who know the truth, and we, the poor, silly people, we don't understand what's going on. You know, that whole story about the system that has the idea of economic and social system that we've been brainwashed by. Everybody has been brainwashed by that, and our leaders also believe that that's the only way we can really conduct human life, and so that's really causing a big problem.
I mean, just you said try and explain this a bit more, why individual activities are not enough. We've actually done a calculation in the book to try and explain this. So you've got this whole planetary chemical atmospheric system changing, and unless we really make some radical changes, then by around 2035, it'll get out of control. We'll kick off a chain reaction. And that will be impossible for us to control. There's no amount of technology that will be able to stop that. And the planet will warm for several hundred years. All the ice will melt, all the trees will die, and that will begin in about 15 years. Now, so you say to yourself, how do we slow that process down? How do we delay that? Now, if you suddenly turn, 100%, I don't know if you're maybe vegan already, but you're 100% vegan, you get rid of your car, you go off grid, you really live 100% sustainably. What difference will you as an individual make? And the answer is you'll delay that chain reaction by 1/5 of a second. So that, even if everybody in Europe, all 550 million people, suddenly became 100% sustainable tomorrow, they'll delay that kickoff by about 18 months. And if all of the people in the US do it, then they delay it by maybe a couple of years because they burn so much more carbon. But you take, huge economic blocks, huge national economies, and you turn them to 100% sustainable, it's not enough. We have to change the world globally, and we have to do it quickly if we're to avoid a real catastrophe.
And there's another problem as well. If one country decides to pull out of the global economic system and goes completely sustainable, I mean that's actually impossible because it's such an interconnected global system. It's impossible for one country to pull out. So everybody has to change at the same time.
Okay, I've got it. And so it really is not an individual level. We are talking about governmental level, and I want to look at what governments should be doing. Yeah, go on.
Sorry. I mean, we're not saying individuals can do nothing. There's a whole section about what individuals, maybe we can talk about that later on. But we're saying that driving a Tesla and turning vegan won't save the planet now.
Yeah, it's what we can do as an individual needs shifting away from shopping to actually activism. But I guess before we move into that, I just want to say that at the same time you're not saying stop doing what you're doing, and and also, how do you guard against being overwhelmed? I just wanted to ask for your advice. You've both got extreme experience of working within NGOs, within climate change, of facing these issues without seeing easy changes. How do you stop people turning off, saying it's too big a problem?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we've really struggled with. This is a huge question. One of the things that has really helped us is working with other people. At the times when we thought that we were on our own, where our voices felt like the only ones, that was the worst point, I think, for us. And it did really feel completely overwhelming. Even when we have worked with other people, there have been times, and we talk about this in the book, when we got a lot of pushback, and we got a lot of cynicism, and that was also, psychologically very difficult to deal with. But I would say the biggest thing to keep from being overwhelmed is to find like-minded people, whether that be by joining a book club, or whether that be from following people on Twitter who are really, who really understand climate science and understand the problem. Whatever it is, try and find other people who also get it, because then you feel just not quite so alone.
And yeah, okay, right. Let's talk about your ideas for what government should do. So you say that it really is the job of governments to introduce emergency measures, because, as you say, if we were all to live perfectly for the planet, it really wouldn't delay what is coming at us. That's not a reason not to do it. So can you? Sorry, yeah, I was wondering if you could talk through what governments need to do.
So I mean, if you take sort of the different elements of society, we've already explained that individuals can't change it. I mean, another popular idea is that businesses can change it. And unfortunately, that's not true either, because businesses are driven, even although they have many people inside these businesses who are deeply environmentally aware and want to do something right, but they're driven by the markets. They have to increase their quarterly returns every quarter.
And actually, that brings us back to the title of the book, Chicken Can't Lay a Duck Egg, because the system, the corporate system, is designed to make a profit. That's what it does.
Now, there are businesses that can be profitable and can be sustainable, and they may account for billions and billions of dollars worth of business. But of the global economy, they're tiny. So most of the economy can't be profitable and be sustainable. And if somebody tries to be sustainable and it increases their costs, then they'll lose, because somebody who doesn't care and can do it lower cost will take more market share. And so the business system is also trapped in this economic mindset. So then the only group that really can have any influence here is the state. Now, because of what we've been told for the last 30 years, we've been told that the state is bad, that we want smaller government, but actually, good government is sometimes necessary and can be most powerful. And it's the only real part of society that can make the changes that are needed. So we need to legislate. We need to stop companies producing these gases, and we need to stop them doing that quickly. So we need to close the coal, oil and gas business. Even although that's going to cause all sorts of hardships, we need to pay people from these industries and those that suffer out of government coffers so they don't suffer financially. We need to restrict vehicle use. We need to restrict aircraft use. We need to shut down all these cruise liners, although the COVID has done a great job for that for us. But we need to make some radical changes, because the number one goal must be to cut emissions every year for the next 10 years by at least 6 or 7%. We need to be really radical about this, and it needs to be enforced. And so that can only come from government.
And some people might say, well, how on earth are you going to pay for that? There's a magical money tree somewhere that's going to pay for all of this. Well, actually, yeah, that's the great news. There is a magical money tree. It's called the printing presses, and we've done it before. When the banks have been in trouble because of financial crises, then governments printed money to get us out of that. So if they can do it for the banks, surely they can do it for the planet.
Yeah, we have learnt that, and I think this is the kind of the big sort of underlying theme of your book, is that we must not ignore the fact that this last 10 months has shown most of the world that we can do this.
Exactly.
I think as I understand it, is that the mindset that we tend to believe in, that you outlined, the economic how we inherited it, is so powerful that we've almost stopped believing that societies can change so quickly, and that is why the climate emergency seems so difficult to solve. Am I in the right area?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what we're seeing now is this enormous push to return to normal. and this hope that the vaccine is going to work, and this belief that, you know, if we can just get through this winter, then everything will go back to. I mean, we see reports every day from analysts and from companies saying everything will be back to normal by 2022 or 2023, and that looks, from sitting here watching from our little parallel universe, highly unlikely. You see the efforts to produce these vaccines, the numbers that are going to be put in place, the fact that you're not going to treat all the children and the teenagers, which means you can't get any sort of, you know, maximum level of immunity. And there's all sorts of problems down the road, the variances of the mutations of the virus that are coming out. We're going to have a new normal, and that new normal is not unlike what we have now. So let's begin to think about how we can make that new normal much more balanced and much more in balance with nature and much more in balance with each other, because we have this unique chance.
Yeah, this idea that the vaccine is going to somehow save us and bring everything back to normal is very much like what we hear in the climate debate, when people say, well, you know, there's some technology that will be invented, some app or some magical technology or some electric car that will make everything go back to normal, and we won't actually have to change our lives fundamentally at all. So it's actually part of a common way of thinking, and it's that way of thinking that we need to change.
And don't forget, I mean, this virus is a direct consequence of our disregard for nature. You know, we have invaded nature's space, and it's not just this virus. I mean, if you look at MERS or SARS or HIV or Ebola, all of those are the same root source, which is that we're invading nature's space, and these viruses are jumping across into humans. And the longer, you know, we carry on going down this pathway where we disregard nature, the more of these viruses, and this is not me speaking, this is the World Health Organization, the more of these viruses we're going to get. And so we need to change fundamentally for our own health as well as the health of the planet.
Oh no, I know what you mean, Graeme. It's one of the things like we really veer away from sort of like talking about, but we work a lot with academics and experts, and Margaret Heffernan had pre-warned us, I think back in February, we were going to have trouble with our live events through the year. And in reading her work, it seemed like the world knew a pandemic was going to come. They even knew what type it was likely to be, and they were sort of down the road in terms of, you know, how to deal with it, which is perhaps why many of the money packages were ready to go, but they didn't expect it to be this one. So
I mean,
it was like
in some ways it's astonishing. I mean, we sit here and we watch it as like from our little spaceship, and you look at the lack of response. Actually, I mean, you've got people simply doing knee-jerk responses. All these children that are being educated at home, I mean, the systems haven't been developed. Nobody's thought about how to fundamentally improve that. You know, we have these meetings. We have Zoom now, which seems to be, you know, moving at least in a more advanced direction. Thankfully, we can do this, but basically everybody thinks we can go back to normal, and you know, that's looking pretty unlikely from where we're looking at. And so we need to think fundamentally about how we live our lives and how we can live our lives, so that we can reassess what we're doing.
And do you think that part of that, we've done a lot this year on the difficulty of giving up status symbols, psychologically the difficulty of giving up high value things like power and money. We are kind of programmed to try and have as many resources as possible psychologically, and we've done a lot with neuroscientists and psychiatrists on this and how to counter it. But is this again part of the mindset? Are you saying that part of it is fundamentally starting to believe that we've got to accept different living standards as societies?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think so, and we see this in so many different ways. I mean, it's of course the convenience of turning on a light switch. Of course, it's the convenience of being able to have hot water whenever we want it, or air conditioning. Those are also things that make life comfortable, and we recognize it's not always about having another Louis Vuitton handbag, right? Sometimes it's just about being able to have basic comfort and hygiene. But come on, we don't all need to go skiing every winter. We don't need to have a new mobile phone every 18 months. So these are things which we have been taught to believe are normal. They're not. And those of us who are old enough can remember many decades where we didn't have that stuff and we didn't suffer for it. So yeah, I mean, it is about giving up the idea of some things.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying that, we have to go back and live like in the dark ages. We're saying we need to go back and live more like people did in the 1960s or 70s, where you don't have a holiday, you don't have 15 suits from some fancy tailors, you don't have holidays in the Maldives, but you enjoy your life in different ways. I mean, if I think about my grandparents, and they enjoyed their life by dancing and by playing golf and by meeting with their friends. A very low carbon footprint, and they were, I would argue, probably immensely happier than a lot of people are today, where they're driven by this constant need to reflect their values in what they buy. I mean, it's again a mindset, and if we can change that, we can see actually a future which is potentially much happier than we have today.
Yeah, and that seems eminently, changeable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's and the virus again. People are being slow to respond to it, and there's, from what we read, tremendous mental pressures on people and tremendous anxiety and depression, and part of the process we're going through will be to find a solution to all of those, which can relieve people of that anxiety, but also make them think about the world differently.
But you said, Helen, it's eminently changeable. It is, absolutely. But behind all of that is a huge machine telling us how to think and telling us what's normal. I mean, you pick up any newspaper or magazine or switch on any TV channel. I mean, there's constant pressures and reminders to consume, to go on holiday, to redecorate your home, to get the latest accessories, to have different kind of paint on your walls, whatever it is. There's this constant push to not be satisfied with what you have, and so in order to make that change, we also need cooperation from the media and, frankly, re-education in the media.
We've got a question on that coming up, which I just want to ask you. But before I do, to say we did a session yesterday on how the magic and the brain, really, how magic shows how the brain works. And, for a lot of the time, our brain is very simple. Whatever is put in front of it, it will kind of respond quite easily to. So, if you are continually being fed, have this, buy this, you need this to keep up with your, the way that you see yourself. It's very hard to unconsciously come back and say, no, I'm being sold here. And, and I think, that's why your book is so good, of sort of like giving a blueprint of like standing back and rethinking how you want to approach your life.
No, I don't particularly want to get into politics, but Brexit provides a very good example of this. I mean, when we lived in the UK 20 years ago, I mean, the news media, some of the news media in particular, were drip feeding a message every day that said, Europe's responsible, or Europe creates stupid laws and the Europeans are trying to rule us. And it created this mentality over a long period of time that made people think that Europe was all bad. And so it's led to a situation which is economically very damaging for Britain. And so it's that kind of mind warping that we've got also with materialism and individualism, which we need to get away from.
Graeme, you set off the Brexit alarm.
That's a good idea.
No, absolutely. Blimey, well, we've still got 4 days. So the question is...
It's a bit like climate change in that case, because we've only got a short amount of time there too.
Well, it is. We're apolitical here, aren't we, Dickon?
Yes.
Yes, anyway. So the question is, how do we affect change in a democracy where the public conversation, mediated by the press and media companies, are against change and against that really powerful message?
I mean, what we're trying to say here is that actually democracy is part of the problem in some ways, because again, we've had our minds warped into what we're doing, that we think we have a democratic system because we make a vote every 4 or 5 years, and we have 2 or 3 parties, and that therefore the system is democratic. But actually, the system's not very democratic at all. And if you go back to the way things were in ancient Greece, what they meant was by democracy was completely different. I mean, the people actually ran the country. A small group of people perhaps, but certainly a much larger percentage of the population actually ran the country. And so we have this situation where we actually need to reclaim democracy. that we've lost it to a few irresponsible people, wealthy individuals who are ploughing their own furrow, and corporates who are manipulating the system particularly. And so what we're saying is we need to raise awareness about the seriousness of this issue. And then we need to kick out the people that are currently, running the political systems and replace them with some new people, with some new ideas who can actually think long term and think about the benefits of the majority. So we're looking at people taking back democracy.
And we talked earlier about misinformation and about confusion over climate change. And this is also a serious problem in many democratic systems, where it's okay for people to put out false stories and to have them published in newspapers and widely disseminated. And this is a big problem with understanding climate change. This is a big problem with understanding Brexit. I'm sorry, I said the word again. But this is also something that needs to be addressed. It's really not okay. It's not democratic in the real sense of the word to put out stories which are fundamentally false.
Okay, so there's a lot to do. What is your advice? You talked a little bit, Bernice, I think, about coming together with other people to take action, to be more involved in affecting change. And you have a blueprint in your book, but are we talking about citizen assemblies? Are we talking about joining different groups? Is it time to become more involved and beyond, as you say, we've reframed what can the individual do in terms of what we buy. How do we reframe it to actually affect change, to get governments to close all greenhouse gas producing activities, to do the things that we need to do, to find the money to transition these businesses out of where they are to where they could be?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we say in the book, in the kind of blueprint for change, is learn your facts, learn what climate change is. And the book is, of course, a great place to start, but we also give advice on where else you can go to learn what is going on. So learn your facts and learn them inside out. And then the second thing we say is to go out and talk to people you know. So start with something which is manageable. So talk to your friends, talk to your family, and try and convince them to take this seriously and to understand how big the problem is. Now, of course, we understand that people can't just give everything up and go onto the streets and become activists and live off grass. People need to go to work. They need to earn a living. They need to be able to have a decent standard of living and feel they're doing okay. But we also need to move much more quickly now. And so we kind of have a message of you do what you can in your daily lives, but also start to become much more active. And so when you talk about citizen assemblies, I think that that is a very good place to start. But we don't believe that there is just one solution. We don't think there's just one place to start. There are lots of different places that people can have an effect.
I mean, these citizen assemblies, which are taking place particularly in the UK, are a really interesting development. And if you bring together Extinction Rebellion and Fridays for Future, and there are a lot of people out there who really understand what's going on. Bring them together, start a political movement. And you'll find that there are some rather sort of strange organizations, perhaps because they don't obviously fit together, that will also be supportive. I think the Catholic Church, the Vatican, really understands this problem. But then so does the military. The military in the US and Germany have done a lot of work because climate change is going to be a very big problem for migration and for security. Bring together the people in the countries, and again, I think in places like Germany or Austria or Scandinavia, where thinking on this is much more advanced than it is in much of the English-speaking world. So bring together those who get it and have one single goal, which is to slow the pace of climate change.
But of course, within those countries and within those industries or those sectors, there are also, staunch conservatives. So in Scandinavian countries, many people do get it, but there are some serious fundamental changes that need to happen in their way of thinking as well. The Catholic Church, they do get it, but of course there are some influences there that also need to be seriously addressed. So it's about finding the groups within those groups to start joining up those dots.
I mean, the other thing is, I mean, all this sounds pretty utopian and unlikely. We know that.
Yeah, we know that.
But it's the only way we can see forward right now.
It's not like there's a decent alternative, right? I mean, it's not like if we do nothing and we carry on doing what we're doing, then it will somehow be okay. The alternative is really bad, so we need to start being utopian.
And we know that within the next 10 years, enough people will realise that we have to do something fundamentally different. We know that climate change will become so bad that we will begin to demand change in huge numbers. Now, the risk is that it's too late because of this chain reaction. And so we know that we're talking to an audience which will increasingly listen to what we're saying. And so the chance of change will increase. We're just trying to catalyse that and make sure it happens faster.
Yeah, and I really love that. And also the way that you call upon the need to not, I think you call it the People's Front of Judea, is that, we have to accept that the more people that come in, the better, and to stop any infighting, because it's just not helpful. It's like whatever, wherever you can get help, however you can build a mass to affect the change is the important thing, not saying, oh, well, they're not doing that, or, they're not helping with this, or, because do you think that's something that the movements suffer from, this kind of infighting?
Yes, we've both come across this particularly in the NGOs that we've worked in, where there's a difference of opinion about how to move forward and where the focus should be, and so you end up not actually moving forward in any meaningful way at all because you're all arguing about the route that you should take.
And so that's why we've said very clearly in the book, one goal. And the goal is to slow the pace of climate change by cutting emissions by 7% every year. And everything else falls out of that. And you try and limit the damage and you try and help people. But one goal, and so there's no debate about what we're doing here. And so we can focus on that one objective.
Okay, and stop thinking at the back of your mind that there's going to be some big technological fix.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We've got, and that's another part of the idea we've got that technology will solve everything, and this is not actually a technological problem. I mean, we can stop emissions tomorrow if we choose to. It's a decision. It's a mentality. We're actually choosing not to fix the problem. We're choosing instead to carry on releasing gases because it's more convenient and we don't want to live in any way that's different from today. So actually, it's a social mindset problem that we're choosing not to fix. It's not a technological problem. And so even if you had some sort of massive technological fix, this economic mentality, this push for endless growth would still result in other problems. We have to change our mindset if we're to live sustainably and survive long term.
Thank you so much, Graeme. Thank you so much, Bernice. Thank you so much for being part of our festival. It is a very big idea in a very small book, and Graeme and Bernice have worked really hard to make it incredibly accessible. It's just $7.99, and it really, really helps to take what can be done into a way that can get it into your brain and help move further along the path towards reducing emissions. So thank you so much. Oh yes, Fiona says, great stuff, slightly scary, but yes, of course, polarisation keeps us divided, and that's plain to see these days. We need to remain open to those opposing views and keep on to that one aim. So perfect. Thank you, Fiona, doing my job nicely, summing up there. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. And thank you very much, Bernice and Graeme. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. As I said, Bernice and Graeme's book is available in our foyer if you'd like us to send you a copy. And I will see you in 15 minutes at 11 o'clock for Carmine, I think, and the science of stress, how to deal with this year psychologically. Thank you for joining us. It's been a great pleasure to speak to Graeme and Bernice. Bye.